Data is absolutely central to 21st century business. The way that I look at it is through an information lens. The 20th century was about building larger and larger organisations that had layer upon layer of process. In fact, when we look at the 1970s and 1980s business, excellence was defined in terms of process quality, straight through reducing the number of errors, the error rate. By the mid-90s, we were starting to see mass centralisation, and it was centralisation not in terms of processes, but centralisation of decision-making. So between the 1980s and 90s, we saw a shift in conglomerates. Instead of the focus being balance sheet and being able to afford to hold a large number of assets, it became the ability to be able to make goods decisions centrally. It's why we moved from a branch-centric banking world to a head office-centric banking world. By the 21st century, what we saw is new businesses starting, and think of the Amazons and the Googles, that were fundamentally not process-driven, but information-driven. They didn't think about how do I engineer a new set of processes. They thought about what is the information needed to perform a task, and then what processes will support that information. And organisations' private information assets are in many ways their prime point of differentiation. Anybody can go and get publicly available information. There is absolutely a point of differentiation about how well you use that public information, but once you've used it and people understand how you use it, somebody else can come along and do the same thing. In comparison, for an internal asset, something that other people don't have access to, that's a true point of differentiation. Just think for a moment about the battle between GE and Rolls-Royce in the airline engine marketplace. Years ago, airline engines were all about simply selling this big piece of machinery and putting it on for the best price with the best performance metrics. Then we moved into a marketplace really introduced by Rolls-Royce, where it was pay for thrust, pay for the service that was delivered. The consequence of that was Rolls-Royce became responsible for the maintenance, the management of this asset. The airline was just responsible for running the asset. And then between the two major companies, GE and Rolls-Royce, the battle becomes who owns the data, who has the best data about an airline and hence can optimise and provide the best efficiency for a given airline to be able to run their engines for them. Around the world, we're seeing boards having different types of discussions. Some boards are having very mature discussions, particularly where they're entering new business domains, to say what unique data assets do they have about a particular market domain that will allow them to service products in new ways. Other boards are still playing catch-up, quite frankly. They're dealing with a world that's getting increasingly digitally disrupted, but they're trying to respond with process excellence around the products that they already have. And then we're seeing everything in between. There is no doubt that every year the conversation about data in the boardroom improves incrementally. So I think that in 2014, I believe that big data, analytics, the power of information has already been sold to most business stakeholders. I'm not having conversations anymore with organisations about whether they need to understand what analytics is or whether they need to understand the power of information. But I am having conversations that say, where is the weighting? How much do I invest in these data assets? So the question about value is absolutely fundamental. We should not shy away from putting a value on an information asset. It may be hard to put a value around it. It may be a changing value. It may be an inexact value, but at least understanding the order of magnitude is really, really important. The order of magnitude value, the order of magnitude value to another organisation, and the order of magnitude opportunity that could be achieved from it, because then you know whether you should be investing $100,000, $1 million, $10 million, $100 million into a given asset to try and realise customer value. Well, since 1993, the accounting bodies around the world have been debating accounting standards for information assets. We haven't got there yet. but it's kind of creeping in. And in fact, when you go through a company's balance sheet, you typically find information hidden in lots of nooks and crannies, just waiting to be pulled out and understood. So this trend of putting a value on information is happening, and it's continuing. And at some point, there will be agreed accounting standards that will see it move and become far more explicit. As you do that, you see companies being valued and divisions within companies being valued much more explicitly based upon their information assets, which then starts to create the concept of information traders, information custodians. So one of the traps that many organisations fall into is to regard information as an IT problem, and they create an IT person as the custodian. So you'll see somebody will have a title like data warehouse manager, and really what they're being asked to do is to be the owner of really valuable information on behalf of the enterprise. What we're seeing happen is, in a world where you put a value on information, you still have somebody who's responsible for the nuts and bolts of running the system, but you've got somebody over the top who's called something like an information trader. And they're not a cost centre, they're a profit centre. And their job is to look at every piece of information around the organisation and not say how much will it cost to put it into central resources where I can consolidate it and put a value on it and put it on the balance sheet, but rather their job is to actually pay lines of business for their information and keep on paying year on year to supply good information. So that encourages them to collect good information from customers. And then in turn, their job is to realise value by on-selling that information internally and even potentially externally, in creating interesting and creative joint ventures and partnerships based upon information streams. There's about half a dozen recognised methods for putting a value on information. There's a discipline called information economics, which kicked off in the late 90s, about the same time as behavioural economics, and it's really matured over the last decade and a half. And each of the techniques you mentioned, so the idea of being able to identify what is the decision impacts of information is a really important technique. The replacement cost is a really important technique. Another technique is to look at the market value of a company with and without its data. Again, that also gives you that's also a technique. A technique looking at what an independent third party would pay in a liquid market for the data is another technique. No one of these techniques stands on its own. What you do is you actually try to find two or ideally three of the techniques that works for a given data set, and then you triangulate so that you end up with this range. And think about it, it's no different to looking at real estate. You know, if you are trying to buy an apartment in a popular part of town where there are dozens of similar apartments being sold every week, it's pretty easy to put a value on it because it's a liquid market. If you're trying to buy a piece of industrial real estate in, say, Detroit, where there's not a lot of industrial real estate turning over, you can still put a value on it. You have to put a value on it, but it's much harder. It's going to have a bigger range because there's more uncertainty because it's not a highly liquid market. There is no doubt that you don't achieve value until you actually do something with it, and gaining insights is one, but only one, of the most important things you can do with data. But I'm a little bit careful when we tie because I sometimes hear a discussion to say we shouldn't be talking about the value of information, we should be talking about the value we gain from insights. And I'm a little cautious because that can encourage bad behaviours within an organisation. If I look at any asset of an organisation, I could say I will value the asset based upon the return I'm getting on the asset. The problem is that then encourages me to allow lazy assets to sit there and remain lazy. What I need to be looking at is what is the potential, what return should I be getting on that asset, and how much capital have I got tied up in that asset, and hence would I make a different investment decision. So gaining insights is a really important return, but I need to understand, what is the potential value I could achieve, and are the insights I'm achieving equivalent to that value? Because my challenge is not to say that should limit the information. Rather, what I should be doing is saying, I'm clearly not finding all of those points of value, and I should be trying to expand my horizons. Similarly, I should also look at the other things I can do with the data. We assume that it is kind of almost a back office activity to gain insights. I'll look at all of the customer data and I'll, out of that, determine my customers would be predisposed to buy this type of product, so I'll go and design, manufacture and put out the type of product. But actually I can involve the customers in that process. I can embed information in the processes that they interact with me, in which they interact with me, and then enrich their interactions so that they have a feeling that I really understand them, and perhaps they can continue to enrich the information that we have about them. You create this virtuous cycle. So it shouldn't just be I'll collect information over here and I'll do insights over here. It should absolutely be something it should involve the customer themselves, or the staff members, or your JV partners, or your suppliers, all of the participants in the data that you have. I need good technology in order to be able to manage the vast array of data. It's quite popular to say data isn't a technology problem, because a lot of organisations have a massive amount of technology that they're underutilising. But just because of that doesn't mean it's not a technology problem. I need to have good technology. But at the same time, good technology doesn't solve the problem. I need to have people who are skilled and capable of being able to provide the insight. So I'll be able to provide the interpretation, being able to actually manipulate the data and get inside it and make valid decisions on it. It's incredibly frustrating when you see a combination of good technology and great desire but resulting in poor decisions because people have misinterpreted the data or have made bad statistical interpretations. So I need good data scientists. I need people who actually can apply rigour and discipline. But even those two is not enough on its own, because I can find out some really fascinating statistical correlations. I can gain some absolutely brilliant insights, but they may have absolutely no relationship to the business strategy of the organisation. So I need strategists, I need business leaders who are willing to embrace the technology and the data scientists to be able to make data a part of their decision-making process. If any one of those three is missing, then there's absolutely no point in investing in information. So first of all, data that I have about my customers is by its very nature a rear-view mirror. I'm looking at what their behaviour has been in the past. At best, I might be able to see what their behaviour is associated with like products with competitors to see whether or not I might be able to do something in there. It's very hard to use as a pure predictive, as completely as a predictive tool. There's got to be an element of creativity in being able to design the next thing that they want to use. Otherwise, we would never be inventing the next great thing. What data allows me to do is to reduce the size of that invention and that creation. In other words, I don't have to go so far out on a limb on my creativity. I can develop a little bit and then test it and be able to rapidly collect data to be able to determine if I'm on the right path or I should be going down a different path. I think it'd be a really sad world if every marketing campaign that we did, if every new product that we launched was so focus group tested, so driven around the metrics of what the data is telling us, that there's no element of brilliance and creativity coming into us. Nobody telling me what I should want that I never knew I needed. But that brilliance should only ever makes up a small percentage of what is launched into the marketplace. And so the foundations on which it sits upon should be so much more data-driven than I think even the best organisations are achieving today.